Heated exchange between the brigade commanders of the Indian and Chinese armies as the PLA and the Indian army are locked in an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation near Rezang and all along the South Pangong, firing for the first time in 45 years. Shots fired not in anger, but to dissuade the Chinese and to send them back. The one question 1.3 billion people are wondering at this moment, is war with China now inevitable? And these are pictures accessed by India today from the Rezang sector near Chushul and South Pangong. And remember, in these pictures, just like we saw at the time of the Galwan clash, the Chinese army equipped with very unconventional weapons, whether it's machetes, spears, apart from their assault rifles. And the Chinese were saying that it's the Indian army that initiated fire, where it's very clear in these pictures the Chinese have come up to Indian positions. Make absolutely no mistake, the situation along the line of actual control is more brittle, more sensitive than it's been ever in the last 45 years. We will deep dive tonight on the situation on the ground, because this is one story that absolutely no other network can cover with the breadth, the depth, and the kind of insights that we're providing here on India Today. Here are the headlines I'm tracking tonight. Details of China's Pangong provocation revealed. PLA soldiers came armed with sharp weapons to remove Indian soldiers from strategic heights and fired shots. Indian army maintains it showed restraint. Arrested by the Narcotics Control Bureau, Rhea Chakraborty applies for bail. In her defense, the actress says she was in love with a drug addict, accuses Sushant's sister of administering illegal drugs to the late actor. 25 Bollywood stars under scanner after Rhea and Shobik reveal more names. Top actors to be summoned for their alleged links to the drug cartel being probed by the Narcotics Bureau. Kangana versus Shiv Sena war heats up. Maharashtra government orders probe into Kangana's alleged drug links. Actress says ready for blood test and a call record examination. Clinical trials for the Oxford coronavirus vaccine to begin next week in India. Trials were delayed over safety approvals. Piece of information that we are getting on India Today is that the Indian Army and the PLA brigade commanders spoke on a hotline instead of a person-to-person meeting today. The hotline interaction indicated the deteriorating relations between India and China. The two brigadiers had a heated exchange on the hotline over Chinese troops attempting to approach and evict Indian troops on the Mukhpari Peak, which is currently dominated by Indian forces, and the fact that they brought in medieval weaponry with them. What I want to do first up on the Newstrack is to show you a sequential report of the action at night. And remember, these are sectors that we've been tracking very, very extensively here in India Today. The Indian Army, as we've told you, dominating the heights above South Pangong, and the Chinese army moved in, or tried to move in, to evict the Indian forces. They were spotted, they were pushed back, dissuaded, told to go back. That's when the Chinese army opened fire. Abhishek Bhalla in Leh, Gaurav Sawant, Manjeet Negi and Shivarur provide you with the details of our lead story tonight.
This is the location where Indian and Chinese troops faced off on Monday evening. A face-off that sent temperatures soaring higher than ever during the 4-month standoff and ignited a ferocious war of words. But what really happened on Monday night? As always, India Today will break it down for you factually. But before that, the dramatic sequence of events that brought the face-off to light. It It began close to midnight last night when Chinese state-run media flashed news claiming that the Indian army had crossed the line of actual control near the Pangong South Bank. Quoting a statement from the Chinese Army's Western Theatre Command, the news flash went on to say that the Indian Army had opened fire, prompting some unspecified countermeasures from the Chinese side. While China has made major claims, what are the facts on the ground? Remember how we told you about India's dominant positions taken at South Pangong on August 29th? Well, the Indian Army has taken many more strategic positions along the LAC. Monday night's action took place between Gurung Hill and Rezang, somewhere in this area. At about 6 p.m. on Monday, a Chinese patrol came very close to one of the Indian positions at the heights in this area. Given the Indian Army's huge visual advantage in this area, the approaching Chinese were spotted and megaphones and floodlights were used to dissuade them. In response, Chinese troops fired warning shots in the air with assault rifles and light machine guns. The Indian Army says it dissuaded the Chinese aggression, but has not specified what methods were used. This could possibly mean more aggressive megaphone messages or more focused floodlights on the troops' movements and their backup support. Rebuffed in their latest attempt to dislodge the Indian positions, the Chinese returned to the area with a sizable number of armoured vehicles, just as they'd done on August 31st. Expecting this, the Indian Army's T-90 tank regiment, just a few kilometers away, was ready for any escalation. Those are the facts on the ground. Several hours after the Chinese Army's inflammatory claims on Indian action, the Indian Army issued a statement categorically denying that it had indulged in any aggressive actions, including firing, and going on to say that it was the Chinese army that attempted to provoke and was dissuaded by the Indian side. The nature of this dissuasion has been left deliberately vague as the war of words escalates. As claims and counterclaims continue, two things are certain. One, the Indian Army's first move initiative is on full display once again. And two, the Indian Army has learned to use the Chinese playbook against the Chinese. With Manjit Negi and Shivarur in Delhi, Bureau Report for India Today.
Fireworks being reported in that conversation between the two brigade commanders on a hotline. Shivarur joins us with exclusive details on what happened during the brigadier level talks. Shiv, unexpected lines, very, very heated exchanges between the Indian and Chinese brigade commander. What can you tell us about what you're picking up from your sources and the current situation along the ground?
Rahul, this was not a personal meeting like you rightly pointed out. This was a hotline conversation between the two, and we're picking up information that this was a fairly heated exchange, very representative of the deterioration in the situation in that particular area near Rezang, where there continues to be an eyeball-to-eyeball situation between troops. The emergence of a photograph of troops who had approached that area and created some semi-permanent defenses there was also a topic of conversation. The Indian side, the Indian brigadier and his side did raise the issue of the weapons, that these Chinese troops were deployed with. which has of the images that have gone completely viral today. And the Chinese side apparently said that this is a cultural issue. There are some martial cultural issues at play here, and this has nothing to do with border protocol, and that it was the Indian side which had fired first during that exchange last evening. So
Shiv, I want to show our viewers these first satellite pictures accessed by India today from the Rezang area. Rezang, La meaning pass, and remember this is the general area where in 1962 Major Shaitan Singh led one of the most heroic charges of the Indian Army, and just imagine the irony of it all, that this current face-off happening in exactly the same general area. So now on these pictures, what you can see, and when you do a timeline sequence comparing the pictures from a few days earlier with now, it demonstrates how the Chinese have really built up. After the Indian Army went in on the 29th and the 30th of August, Shiv, the Chinese, and remember, unfortunately, these are low-resolution pictures, unlike what we showed you earlier on India Today. Now there's a choke in supply. The satellite company is not putting out those high-resolution pictures, but what we can see in these pictures very clearly, Shiv, is massive Chinese reinforcements being brought in after India's preemptive move on the 29th and the 30th of August, Shiv.
That's absolutely right, Rahul. These are the first, these two images happen to be the first visual depictions, of the Chinese build-up in response to the Indian actions since August the 29th. What you can actually see in these two pictures are at least 3 or 4 Chinese camps that have come up as recently as September 6th and 7th. So these are brand new mobilizations, of the PLA in that particular area, very close to the Spangor Lake, just south of the Pangong's south bank. And obviously, it is from these locations, Rahul, that the Chinese have been trying to, mount missions to dislodge Indian forces at those dominant heights near the line of actual control. These are camps which are on the Chinese side of the line of actual control, but it is from here that they're sending, troop units and possibly infantry vehicles as well near those mountain areas where the Indian posts are currently situated. So very volatile situation of a kind we haven't seen between two nuclear-armed neighbors with two of the largest standing armies in the world. Is war inevitable? If there is war, what kind of hostilities are most likely? Will it be localized in the areas where there is current tension and the Chinese try to come in, or could it just light up the entire line of actual control? And how prepared are we to deal with this kind of a situation? That's what I hope to deal with over the next few minutes. And joining us for perspective, I want to welcome first Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, former Chief of Staff, 14 Corps Director General of the Indian Infantry. He participated in the Operation Meghdoot, understands the in and outs of this entire area where the current conflict with the Chinese is taking place. Colonel Ajay Shukla joins us, leading strategic affairs expert. We also have with us General Gurdeep Singh Uban. General Uban is a former Inspector General of the Special Frontier Force. It was his father who set up the SFF, and he went on to command it as well, not just a battalion but also the entire force. And we've got Andrew Luing, who's a China specialist. He's joining us from Hong Kong. I want to go across to Sanjay Kulkarni first, because one of the things which was cited globally, despite grave border tensions between India and China, was that yahan goliyan nahi chalti. There can be fisticuffs and all manner of tension may escalate. But the one saving grace was that bullets are not fired. The bullets that were fired yesterday were not fired in anger. They were fired by the Chinese army to threaten the Indian army, but there is no telling when bullets are fired in anger. How close are we to war? That's the one question that all of India is asking. General Kulkarni, as a man who understands this area so well, what's your best sense? How do you respond to this? Are we close to war, sir?
Rahul, first, the situation is tense, it's grim, it's absolutely worrisome, it's volatile. There is no denying the fact. After having occupied some of these dominating heights of Blacktop, your Helmet Top, your Rekinla, Razangla feature, what they call it, is the Shipao mountain top, is what the Chinese refer to as. Now, all these heights, when you occupy Magar Hill, Gurung Hill, your entire feature of Rezang, where you rightly said in 1962, where Major Shaitan Singh won a posthumous Paramveer Chakra, where the Kumaunis out of 120 lost 114 men. That was the kind of battle fought at Rezang. Having said that, you realize that these heights are such that give you a deep dominating positions and look and see into entire of the Spangur Gap and the Pangang Swamp. So that is one very important thing. The another thing is the Maldo camp is right below. That is why you saw and noticed that the hotline was on, but they never wanted to meet one another, obviously because they have a sizable amount of mobilization taking place behind. Now, whatever they might mobilize is now we can see it and see deep look and see. And now that is something which is worrisome to the Chinese. Now, another thing that is very important over here to understand is that you realize that the Chinese statement that came, which did not come from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but came from the Western theater. And it said that the troops were going up to negotiate. And therefore, and thereafter, the Indian troops fired at them because they transgressed the LAC. So they negotiate. And just see the kind of equipment that they were going for negotiating. You see the kind of equipment. You rightly said what all stuff they were carrying. It would have been absolutely a repeat of Galwan had they reached the top. And that would have been catastrophic because these are very, very sensitive times when things are boiling up, when the anger can actually result in anything. And I can understand the frustration among the local Chinese commanders because they must have been under pressure as to how come they were not able to prevent the Indians from occupying all the heights south of Pangangso. Now that is something which is very, very worrisome to the. Now when it comes to question of are we heading for a war? Well, I wouldn't say right now, let's give all the options for talk. Yes, preparation has to be full. If you are ready, then you can prevent a war, number one. Number two, these kind of incidents can just trigger something which we are not anticipating. And therefore, a localized conflict cannot be ruled out. We have to be very, very careful. The Chinese are probing. And wherever they find a weakness, they would want to get into a position of strength. Right now, India is in a position of strength.
Okay, Colonel Ajay Shukla, how close are we to what? To hostilities breaking out, to bullets being fired in anger, to any one of these clashes, which very mercifully and thankfully was diffused without bloodshed, actually leading to a Galwan encore? Give me a moment, I'll try and fix that link with Colonel Ajay Shukla. Till then, General Kulkarni, what's your best sense of how the Chinese are likely to react in the manner in which they keep coming up? Will they keep making these probes which don't lead to violence? Or do you think that it's only inevitable that one of these nights there will be violence and India will wake up to information that there's been bloodshed along the line of actual control because our boys are totally charged up and the Chinese don't seem to be behaving themselves?
Rahul, I hope not. But yes, what you're saying can just happen. Can just happen. We have to be very, very careful. The Chinese don't seem to realize. All these statements seem to be saying that the Indians have transgressed the LAC. All of the area is theirs. They don't seem to realize it. What the Chinese are probably pressurizing the government of India is to accept the present status quo. We are not willing to accept the status quo as of now. We are saying status quo ante April 2020 if de-escalation and peace and tranquility is to prevail. Now the Chinese are in a fix. If that be the stand, and Indian stand has been so solid and the deployment is almost, mobilization is mirror image on either side. And if we are the defenders, mountains favor the defenders. If we are occupying heights, it's impossible for us to get dislodged by them. And the number of troops that are required for dislodging people from heights is not a joke. It's virtually impossible. So the Chinese are in a bind. Now, for an honorable exit, what kind of an honorable exit would they be wanting to do at this point of time? Status quo probably is what the Chinese are looking for. We are insisting on status quo ante. And that's where now we are in a fix. At this point of time, we have to be alert. We must be properly equipped at all times, prepared at all times. Chinese will continue to probe this way. And at the when the time when the balloon goes up, they will say, we did not attack, we counter-attacked because the Indians attacked. Now, this is the kind of statements and these are the kind of things. You can see virtual things of 1962 kind of things happening. You can also see what they did in Vietnam in 79 kind of things happening. So it's virtually, I think the Chinese are cornered the world over. They seem to be feeling isolated. They seem to be feeling frustrated.
Okay, Colonel Ajay Shukla joins us now. Colonel Shukla, what's your sense of whether India and China are now almost inevitably hurtling towards a war?
Are you asking me, Rahul?
I am, sir.
Hello.
Yeah, Colonel Shukla, I am. Please go on. I hear you well.
So are you trying to get my views?
Okay, I'm asking this question to Colonel Ajay Shukla. Can you hear me, Colonel Shukla? Because if you can,
Hello.
my sense is that if the Chinese keep sending these probe missions up with the Indians dominating the heights, it's a very, very volatile situation, and any small skirmish or one hot-blooded officer on either side and bullets could start flying, not just in that sector but potentially start escalating elsewhere. How close are we to an actual war? Colonel Ajay Shukla, can you hear me?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Okay, let me go across to Abhishek Bhalla. He's in Leh. He's been speaking to officers in 14 Corps, which is where the current action is taking place. Abhishek, what are your sources telling you about the situation near Rezang, around South Pangong, and what happened? There were about 40 to 50 soldiers we saw virtually face to face. Has that situation been diffused? Have the Chinese pulled back, gone back to their barracks, or are they still anticipating that even tonight the Chinese could try and make further probes?
Well, Rahul, speaking to people who are in the know-how of things, what I've learned is that even as we speak, there is a confrontation in the sense that troops from the Chinese as well as the Indian armies are separated only by a few meters, and there are about 40 to 50 soldiers from the Chinese army that have tried to come inch closer to the Indian positions, and in fact that was the idea. They wanted to dislodge the Indian army troops who had been occupying these heights north of Rezang. Officials saying the situation still remains extremely grim, extremely volatile, and especially because the Indian troops are perched on these mountain heights. That's something that has irked the Chinese, and this was not the only attempt by the Chinese troops to take over these heights. Similar attempts were made earlier as well, but they were preempted because the Indian army had clear intelligence as well as information. In this instance as well, Rahul, they came very close, and that's when the Indian army raised an alarm, and then we had this firing incident. After that, things have been extremely volatile.
Joined at this time by General Gurdeep Singh Uban. He's been former Inspector General of the highly secretive, stealthy Indian force called the Special Frontier Force, which has seen action now in the Blacktop area, going in virtually in a race to the peaks and occupying those peaks where the Chinese are now desperate to get the Indians out. General Uban, welcome, and great job by your force, the force that you led, your father helped establish. Give our viewers your sense of whether you believe India and China inevitably hurtling towards a war.
Your voice is there. Can you repeat the last sentence,
Okay,
please?
my question, General Uban, is do you think India and China are heading towards a war?
Well, Rahul, let me say, having been through two wars, the 71 war and the Kargil war, and been with these specialized troops, I would say I hate war. War brings with it death, destruction, devastation, and it should be avoided as far as as is possible. And in my view, all these other inputs that we can give, diplomatic, political, economic, trade, everything should be tried. Yes, war, if it's inevitable, we'll take it on, and we proved it earlier in the 71 war and in the Kargil war that the Indian Army and my SFF troops, excellent, superb, and there will be no problem. But as I said, we must try and avoid war. It's something that has to be avoided.
What's the feedback that you're picking up from the troops that you earlier commanded? Because I'm sure you're in touch with people who are still in the SFF about the role that the Special Frontier Force played in going up occupying the commanding heights of Blacktop and the kind of advantage that the SFF have now landed India in. Obviously, we can see how hassled and rattled the Chinese are by the fact that the Indian army is now going and dominating their Moldo garrison, which we can see, and we can interdict any movement at any time we want.
Rahul, I think it was a very smart move, very well executed. Some details I know, I would not like to go into those details. But let me say that these people who are experts in mountaineering, high altitude warfare, guerrilla warfare, they saw an opportunity and immediately went and occupied an extremely important ridgeline. And where, as you very rightly mentioned, Moldo is visible, the build-up of their tanks and vehicles and so on is there. And we've definitely gained a huge tactical advantage. But I would look at it this way, Rahul, if we have a little time, that, you know, what has really happened is that the Chinese have, in a very cunning maneuver, put in their troops there and occupied certain portions which belong to us across the LAC. And this meeting of the two forces and trying to get them back, that is between the brigade commanders and the generals and the corps commanders and so on, is all right for a short time to make sure that clashes do not take place. But we have to think of an overall strategy. We can't keep on carrying on like this, that every second day they come and occupy some portion of ours, and then they say that we will mutually withdraw. Withdraw to what? They've got to get back to the April positions first before we can have a talk. But I would rather say that we must look at the overall picture, step back from the canvas, and decide how to deal with this belligerent neighbor who does not spare anybody. They've had issues with Russia, the old communist ally. They've had issues with Vietnam. They've had issues with Japan, Taiwan, South China Sea, Malacca Straits, Indian Ocean, Straits of Hormuz, name it. So in my view, first of all, we must get hold of the diplomatic angle, the political angle, the trade angle, the economic angle.
Okay.
And then
Colonel Ajay Shukla is back with us. Colonel Shukla, first, do you hear me now?
I hear you, Rahul.
Okay.
I hear you.
Finally, great. So you've been tracking this crisis very, very closely. If you were asked at this time, given what happened last night, the fact that shots were fired for the first time in 45 years along the line of actual control, are you fearing that the manner in which this crisis is spiraling and continuing, India and China inevitably heading towards conflict and war?
Rahul, there is very little doubt about that. The way that this conflict and this confrontation is shaping up is one where the two sides are in direct contact with one another. Both are aggressive, both are hungry, both are unwilling to back off. Both sides are sort of sticking to their positions. There seems to be no political guidance on the Chinese side to back off or to agree to a sort of disengagement that will be acceptable to India. And in the circumstances, the Indian army, which is a lean, mean, hungry, aggressive army, as good as the best of them, has little choice but to stick to its positions, to advance its positions, to prevent the Chinese from occupying heights of advantage. And that is what we are seeing playing out on the ground every day.
No, but try and explain this to me militarily, Colonel Shukla, with all the wealth of experience that you have at your command. You've got the Indians dominating these heights now, whether it's Blacktop, whether it's Rezang, and you've got the Chinese coming up. They're not coming up in a force ratio of 1:6 for every one Indian soldier, sending 6 up. In groups of 40 and 50, they're sending these people up to these Indian posts. I'll have those still images on our screen. And the Chinese Western Theatre Command tells us that they're trying to negotiate. Now, who comes with spears, rods, and assault rifles to negotiate? But even if you leave that on the side, when they come up in these numbers, and it's clearly daylight, we can see that in the picture. What are the Chinese thinking? Like, what is their tactic? Militarily, what are they trying to achieve? You're coming up, you're sitting ducks. If the Indians were to open fire, all these 40, 50 Chinese soldiers would be dead in a flash.
Well, they're doing what they're doing at the political level. They're doing it at the military level now, which is to try and throw the Indians off balance. They are counting on the Indian restraint. They are counting on fire not being opened. And they're counting on sort of rattling the Indian troops into vacating their positions or to sort of seeking compromise. They don't know that this is not going to happen. It really is not going to happen. And that's where the problem is. 3 days after the two defense ministers have met, 2 days before the foreign ministers are due to meet, the two sides are actually exchanging fire. This means that the political dialogue, the diplomatic dialogue is paying no dividends, and you're actually in a position where you're getting more and more confrontationist every day. And then you come to what you were talking about, which is, are we coming closer to war? The answer, as far as I can see, is yes.
You're saying that you think that a war is inevitable. Andrew Ling, why does China want war? At a time when the world is dealing with a virus that China unleashed, for the Chinese to be so intransigent and even militarily crazy and suicidal. The Indian army is sitting on the tops, on the mountain tops. You've got the Chinese army coming up. You're sending these troops up almost like cannon fodder. It's almost as if you want bloodshed. You then want to blame the Indian army that you killed XYZ number of Chinese soldiers, and now you want to escalate hostilities. What in the world is going on, Andrew Ling?
Well, I don't think that China wants a war, nor does India, because both countries are nuclear armed. Both countries are rather strong on its military, and the territorial integrity is very, very important issue on both sides. And that's why both sides have agreed that no bullets should be fired. That kind of protocol has been held for 40 years until now. And then, as was mentioned just now, both sides, the defense ministers, only recently met in Moscow with the intention of scaling down the conflict. As I said, I mean, if what was happening on the front lines could well lead to unintended consequences, and then even if both sides don't want a war, any kind of fresh or hot kind of conflict would immediately escalate, and then the consequences would be very, very difficult to control. And also, it's not a battle for heights, because these are only tactics. It's not going to solve the problem. And also, I don't think that the signal has been sent from up high to fire the shots, no matter where this.
No, but then let's focus on that, because we've got some people who understand military tactics really well. And I want to go across to General Kulkarni. I want to show you these pictures, because what we don't know, we don't know. But what we know, let's try and dive deep into that as much as we can. What you're seeing on your screen in a moment are those pictures of the Chinese army and the Indian army locked in conflict. Now, spend a moment with me visualizing what would have happened in the build-up to this face-off. What we can see in those pictures is the Indian army deployed on a mountain. Somewhere in the middle of the mountain, doesn't seem like the top, but they're on the top. They're above the Chinese army. The Chinese army has come up. And now they're basically negotiating, as the Chinese government would have us believe, with the Indian army and saying, go back. Now, General Kulkarni, any person with any basic understanding of military tactics realizes that if you are serious about trying to evict a force that's dominating the heights, you need to send in many more soldiers than the number of soldiers who are ensconced on the height. Remember, in Kargil, when the Pakistani army was dominating, whether it's Tiger Hill or Tololing or any of the other heights, we sent in 7 times the number of people, the Mujahideen and the Northern Light, the Pakistani army, the Northern Light Infantry that were deployed on the heights. Now you've got 40 to 50 Chinese soldiers, we are told, coming up to this position. What's the message? What are they attempting? What are they trying to do? Why are they sending their boys up like cannon fodder? Are they, as I suspect, General Kulkarni, in your view as well, trying to escalate? That someone somewhere fires and then we'll say the Indians opened fire and now we want to fire back. What do you think is going on militarily in these pictures, sir?
Rahul, I have faced similar situation about 15 years back. Now when you're talking about it, it's just struck me. 15 years back, similar situation on a different height. I will not tell you where, but different height. In same manner, they came, they just went around the post, and then we actually had to push them back. And then, of course, 15 years back, the situation wasn't that bad. If you called for their commander and told him, come on, get back, they understood and they did disengage themselves and left within about half an hour. But today, let me tell you, it's a serious situation. The Chinese must not, repeat, must not indulge in it for any small handing of a situation. It will go out of control, firstly. Secondly, what I feel now, having occupied these heights around the Chushul Valley, they have lost the battle of Chushul ab initio. They cannot do anything. They cannot launch their mechanized columns and light tanks that they have lined up all behind. They just cannot do it. They know it's absolutely no go. They have lost north of Pangangso. They know it is no go. Now, what do they do now? They are in the absolute bind that the Indians have surprised them. Indians have occupied their height without a single shot being fired, and all that they were planning to do was difficult. Now, this kind of, even if there were 40 people, what I think the local commander must have told them, just go and occupy the height. We will see what it is. And if we get into a fist fight, you know what you are equipped with. Let's do whatever we can do. It's an absolute moments of frustration and desperation that is set into the Chinese commanders. And the very fact that the Western Theatre commander today, who's supposedly very, very close to Xi Jinping, who on his birthday did what he did at Galwan, now you realize that he is on a back foot. He knows the question and for which he was lifted from Doklam and brought to Eastern Ladakh and made the Western Theatre commander is in a bind. He has lost his battle ab initio. He can forget it. The way the Indian army is occupying the heights in and around Chushul, Chinese can forget it. Ab initio, they've lost the battle. So
there are two options, Colonel Shukla. When the broad sense is that the Chinese military is at a disadvantage, either they can accept it as a fait accompli, like India did for a while when the Chinese came in from finger 8 till finger 4, or they can escalate and try and push back. Will they lie low and accept the Indian dominance, which what we're seeing day after day, night after night, the Chinese don't seem to be willing to. They're sending in probes as the desperation increases, as the Indian army doesn't go back, their threats fail. Does that then put more pressure on the Western Theatre Command to escalate even further?
Well, first of all, Rahul, I don't agree with this assessment that the Chinese army is completely beaten and sort of at a disadvantage. This may be true in the Chushul area, where a certain number of heights have been occupied by the Indians. But in Depsang, the Chinese are at a great disadvantage. They are well inside Indian territory. They are ensconced. They are inside Indian territory in Hot Springs area as well. In Pangongso, they are still occupying the Green Top and the ridge lines of Finger 3. The situation is being wrongly portrayed that the Chinese have been beaten and the great Indian army has won the war already. No, this is just early days. We have carved out a good position for ourselves in the Chushul area, in the south bank of Pangongso. But the Chinese are still sitting pretty in other places. So the Western Theatre Command, what they are thinking and what they are doing, we don't really know. But I don't think they're in a position of desperation where they're going to be sort of forced to throw troops into battle and, give the Indians an easy victory. I don't think that's the case.
Sure. So you're suggesting, as is reasonably logical, that instead of trying to attack the Indians in the area where the Indian army is dominating, the Chinese army could try and press levers in pockets where the Chinese army dominates. And therefore, a lot of the focus now is on India's External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, who will be meeting his Chinese counterpart. It's a page straight off the classic Chinese playbook. Every time there's a high-level India-China talk, it's followed typically by a border provocation. Just 2 days after Rajnath Singh met his Chinese counterpart in Moscow, PLA soldiers resorted to firing in the air in eastern Ladakh. Soon, S. Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister, will be meeting the Chinese Foreign Minister. But India seems to have drawn a red line for Beijing. And in this very crucial meeting, it will be seen whether diplomacy can find a way out of this military logjam. Geeta Mohan with this story.
India-China relations have of late been mired with what is being seen in some quarters as Chinese expansionism. And all of this is happening amid the coronavirus pandemic that has pushed India to being the second most infected country in the world. The incident of Monday night has escalated the border issue to a level where questions are being asked about why India should hold any talks with China. After all, this is the first instance since 1975 of actual firing having taken place at the India-China border. However, despite the objections, India has decided to go ahead with the proposed meeting between the foreign ministers on the sidelines of the SCO meet in Moscow. The diplomatic belief being that India has the leverage at this point in time.
India definitely doesn't want to go to war with China at this point in time when the Indian economy is still slowly recovering from the lockdown and the future is extremely uncertain. India has also exerted a lot of asymmetric pressure on China through economic means by bringing Chinese investments to a standstill, by discouraging Indian companies from importing products from China, banning Chinese companies which had apps in the Indian market. So really the marginal utility of these economic measures are diminishing.
The External Affairs Minister on his part has set the agenda straight for any talks with his Chinese counterpart. Ahead of the meet, S. Jaishankar has made it clear that LAC tension can't be delinked from bilateral ties and will have to be addressed. It is felt that if the planned meeting between the defence ministers does take place, then S. Jaishankar will not only be talking about the border issue, but will be doing so from a point of advantage. After all, Indian troops holding Kala Top and Helmet Top, earlier held by the Chinese, would not have gone down well with the Chinese military establishment. Apart from mounting border skirmish, India has been seen taking a more aggressive stance on international issues concerning China. The most recent has been the messaging involved in a senior BJP leader like Ram Madhav attending the funeral of Tibetan SFF commando Naima Tenzin, a not-so-subtle hint at India's changing stand on Tibet vis-a-vis China.
Spiritual connection, historical connection, all these things. Geographically, we are connected, with India. So that's why the large number of Tibetans are in India. His Holiness Dalai Lama has been in India for the last 60 years. He calls himself proud son of India. For all these reasons, right, India should have, more, clearer and more assertive policy on the issue of Tibet as well.
In another break from the past, 2 Indian MPs attended the swearing-in ceremony of President Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan. Aside from this, there are economic measures like the ban or restrictions imposed on Chinese imports in certain specified sectors, as well as the ban on Chinese apps. These actions are said to be hurting Chinese commercial interests. Meanwhile, amid all the border tension and escalation, Beijing has been accusing India of being the aggressor and not China. Something that might be a bit hard for the international community to digest.
It's not just India. There are many countries in Southeast Asia, North America, UK, Australia, even European countries that are engaged in military, diplomatic or economic conflict with China. The only difference for India is that there is a long border between India and China that New Delhi has to contend with. And everybody knows how problematic a bad neighbor can be. In New Delhi, Geeta Mohan for India Today.
Given the current military logjam, it's highly improbable that when the external affairs ministers meet, any resolution will immediately be forthcoming. It seems to have gone way past that mark. A quick update on Riya Chakravarti's arrest. Riya is likely to be sent to judicial custody. Ria's lawyer will immediately press for bail. Ria maintains that she's not used drugs. We'll have a lot more for you when we come back with news today. The other big story, Ria Chakravarti arrested by the Narcotics Control Bureau for having arranged for drugs for Sushant Singh Rajput and under the charge of having consumed those drugs herself. Rajdeep Sardesai will have more for you on this story when he comes up with news today. Stay with us. Thank you for tuning in. And as you sleep tonight, do say a prayer for all those soldiers of the Indian Army who at altitudes of 14,000, 15,000, 16,000 feet in extremely bitter cold conditions are standing guard against the dragon. The situation is volatile as it's ever been in the last 4.5 decades, and it's not looking good. The Indian Army needs our prayers, our wishes, and our support. Bye-bye. I'll see you tomorrow.